obvious question is, what is the EU doing? What is our plan?
Hello, and welcome back to Politico's Competitive Europe Summit. I'm Gregorio Sorgi, and I cover the EU budget, or the MFF, for Politico. And as most of you will know, the negotiations between national capitals on the budget have started, and they're well underway. And the big idea in the Commission's proposal from last July is to steer funding away from traditional sectors such as cohesion and agriculture, and spend more money towards innovation, defense, and big industrial projects. And the two big questions that we'll be talking about in this panel is whether this approach will boost growth and make Europe more competitive in the years to come, and turning to the negotiations, whether the Commission's drive for modernization and reform will survive the negotiations between national capitals. And you can all join the conversation and follow us on the social media channel of your choice. But now let's get to the discussion, and I'm delighted to welcome our panelists, Zsolt Darvas, Senior Fellow at Bruegel, Jan Straski, Senior Economist at the OECD, and joining us online we have Jan Szyszko, the Secretary of State at the Ministry of Development Funds and Regional Policy in Poland, who's joining us online from Poland. But I'd like to start with Jan Straski, because one of the more controversial ideas in the Commission's budget is this idea of linking payments to economic reforms. This is something that was used in the Recovery Fund after the COVID pandemic, and now the Commission wants to replicate it for the budget. Do you think that this approach can also work for something like the EU budget?
Okay, so first of all, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure and a privilege. And on the question, I think it is possible. It's important to draw lessons from the NGEU, so from the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the national plans, and the whole progress with this tool, and then apply them going forward to the idea of the national competitiveness plans, or what it's called in the Commission's proposal. There are some points, pressure points, where we have to be careful to make sure that the regional bodies remain involved in formulating the cohesion policy, for example, contributing. But in general, it's just down to the application of the subsidiarity principle. So they should be involved as much as needed. The countries should be involved as much as it's, again, efficient. And there is, in principle, no problem with this working.
And I'd like to join Jan Szyszko in this debate, because Poland is the top beneficiary of EU funding, and traditionally Poland has been skeptical towards this idea of replicating the RRF blueprint for the next budget. What do you fear might not work in this model? And specifically, what do you think could be changed or fixed in the negotiations? Jan, over to you.
Thanks, Gregorio, for having me. It's a pleasure to speak at the event and take part in the panel. Greetings from Warsaw. I must first say that we are in the process of accepting the official position of the Polish government on the budget in the next coming weeks. So what I'm saying here is still unofficial in the formal terms, in the terms of how to treat this voice from Warsaw. This being said, we are very eager to take lessons from the RRF. We are very eager to take the positive lessons and also to learn from the things that have not been as efficient as they could have been in that process. And our experience is that, yes, reforms and investments, or linking reforms and investment, the performance-based approach, can be good and can work well when the reforms are sectoral and investments tied to them are also linked to the sector that the reforms are pursued in. However, we also know that too much centralization can lead to the lack of inefficiencies. Our very unique position, or my very unique position, is that I oversee the spending in the RRF and the negotiations in the Polish Recovery and Resilience Plan, as well as some programs from the cohesion policy. And as the cohesion policy is much more decentralized in Poland than the RRF process is, we also see that in many ways it's more efficient, the investments go faster, and they're very well located and well placed, which is reflected in macroeconomic indicators. And as to what the goals are of the new budget, of the new MFF, in our view, in WASA, there are two goals that we need to pursue, and two goals that we need to have pursued by the new MFF. One is, of course, a Europe that's more competitive externally, that is, versus the United States and versus China. This is all the talk about investment in high tech, in specific sectors that we see a competitive advantage in Europe or in Poland being built. But the other equally important goal is socio-political, and that is linked to creating an equal sense of ownership of the MFF in what's perceived as the old Europe and what is also perceived as the new member states. This is super important for this ownership and for those benefits from the budget to be seen as proportionate geographically to all member states. And I think, although we appreciate the effort that the European Commission has made with presenting this proposal, we're not yet there, and there's some discussion that needs to be done in that respect.
And a quick follow-up, looking ahead at these discussions, but the European Parliament shares many of the concerns and the points that you've been raising. Do you think that politically the European Parliament could be an ally for the countries such as yours that are a bit more critical than the others towards these national and regional partnership plans? Do you see this dynamic playing out?
Yes, I'm aware of some skeptical approach of many political groups in the European Parliament towards this proposal. It is natural that there are different conversations being had. I can imagine the European Parliament wanting to stress its position and wanting to hear some definitions and explanations from the European Commission, similarly to what we want to hear. The biggest question on the table is how do we define competitiveness? Because although the spending or the investment needs or investment goals for the cohesion policy or what is to come after the cohesion policy have been very precisely declared and very precisely stressed in the proposal, the goals of competitiveness are somewhat vague. And we would like to have some degree of clarity what we are signing up for in the next MFF.
And Zsolt, I'll turn to you. You've been covering the budget for a long time, and you've been following many budget negotiations. So I'll ask you to take out your crystal ball and think about what's to come. Do you think that the Commission's reformist approach, especially when it comes to the national and regional partnership plans, so cohesion and agriculture, will survive, given that we have many countries in Council that are critical, the European Parliament is also critical? What do you think they will obtain in these negotiations?
So if you look at the history of EU budget negotiations, then the Commission always made a proposal 2 years ahead of a final agreement, and these proposals were geared towards different directions, but typically there was no fundamental change in the big picture, but there were many changes in the details, including watering down of some of the ambitious proposals of the Commission, and also, more often than not, also reducing the overall heading and the overall ceiling for the MFF. Now, particularly for these partnership plans, the crucial issue is in the details, because also we can look a little bit back, for example, so we had the RRF in 2021, then 2 years later in 2023, we had a performance framework for the common agriculture policy, in which the initial proposal of the Commission was somewhat ambitious, but the member states completely watered it down, and the current performance framework for agriculture policy basically does nothing. I mean, the first assessment will be in 2027, by when all the money will be actually paid out. And here I also see a risk that even though this performance orientation might remain in name, but in subsequent negotiations, it can be basically watered down to just a paper tiger. Let me tell you an example. For example, already in the current proposal of the Commission, there's a so-called expenditure tracking and performance regulation, which is supplementing the main proposal. And it lists more than 500 intervention fields for the EU, which is good, and also lists the various indicators which would be used for measuring performance. Now, for agricultural intervention fields, there are some very sensible indicators. For example, the amount of CO2 emissions avoided. I mean, this is absolutely crucial. Agriculture is a major emitter. We must reduce its emissions. So if that type of indicator will prevail, then we should be happy. But there's also an indicator like the number of young farmers subsidized. Now, yes, it might be good to involve young farmers in agriculture, but if we subsidize them, we don't know what they achieve. So if the final outcome will be more such indicators which, how much money is paid out, how many farmers are subsidized, then it would mean that there will be actually no performance focus at all, or the performance focus will be severely limited in these new partnership plans.
And I'd like to hear Jan Srasky on this issue. What kind of conditionality do you think should be part of these national and regional partnership plans? Because there are some countries saying that it should be proportional, which essentially means that you should not link these payments to grand reforms like pensions reforms or labor market reforms, but from the point of view of the of a macroeconomist who looks at the economy as a whole, do you think that having this kind of conditionality could actually improve the competitiveness of a country and convince the country to carry out these big structural reforms?
Well, I actually agree that it's not an easy question, the conditionality for something like cohesion policy, because I mean, there's the involvement of regional bodies, and this macroeconomic conditionality may not be really appropriate for this purpose, so this is well taken. Still, I think we have to try, so there are many big reforms that have to be done, and if they can be connected with such national plans, then I think that's a good idea. But I think we just need to look what worked in the RRF. We should try more to design output-based indicators, so go a bit beyond the milestones and targets that we have in the RRF, where it's possible. Because when you look at the national plans that were submitted under the NGEU, for some countries had plans that had output-based indicators to some extent, and some countries didn't. So more can be done, and we should definitely try to do that. And just the last point on the common agricultural policy, I think we really need to rationalize it and somehow free money out of it. So a bit is in the proposal of the Commission, but I think more could be done. Ex ante and ex post assessments of effectiveness. We need more data collection, as Scholt already mentioned, on many things. Where the money actually go? Do they support farms, the poorest farmers, or farms that suffer most from variability of income, and so on? There are huge data gaps that can be filled. We need to simplify the common agricultural policy, both for the recipients and the administrators. And there might be other measures, like including or introducing national co-financing to Pillar 1, I mean, it already exists in Pillar 2, it exists in cohesion policy. It seems to me pretty clear that this could be considered also for Pillar 1 of the CAP.
Yeah, and since this is the Competitive Europe Summit, let me turn to the competitiveness in the new budget, because there will be a European Competitiveness Fund, which massively increases the EU's financing towards defense, industrial project, biotechnology, and it's one of the biggest novelties in the European Commission's proposal. But Jan Sisko, there are some concerns that the Competitiveness Fund could potentially benefit the bigger firms in the bigger member states who are best equipped and more modern. And there is a push from some countries in the negotiations to have more geographic distribution as part of the new rules and have a better access for SMEs as opposed to big firms in this new fund. Do you share the concerns that this might be a problem, and how, from the Polish government's point of view, what do you think is the best way to prevent this from happening?
Well, so there are two aspects to this answer. The first one lies at the center of what the European Union is and what the European way of growth is. And to our understanding, the European way of growth has always been distinguished in the world as growth that is just and that is fairly distributed across the entire Union. The whole sense and purpose of the European Union is economic cooperation that benefits all. And as far as Poland very much shares the view that Europe needs to work on its external competitiveness, that we need to do this by investing in the most promising sectors and in technologies across the continent. We also cannot agree for any fund that would practically limit the beneficiaries of that fund to the most developed regions and the most developed companies in Europe. Sharing the concept and one of the biggest fundamentals that lie and build our union, so the just growth, we think that any competitiveness fund must also be accessible to the developing regions, to companies that today are small or at least medium, and in a perspective of 5-10 years can grow to being one of the largest enterprises on the continent, and then help to defend our economic interests and build our economic power in the world. That's absolutely fundamental, and something that we will try to explain and advocate for during those negotiations. The second thing relates to what one of the predecessors have said, which is super important for that reforms and investments, the performance-based approach. It cannot redefine the centralization of the budget. So as far as we see that linking reforms and investments can be beneficial, we believe that it is up to the European Commission to come up with a proposal that allows introducing reforms and investments in a way that is also implementable by the European regions. And this is, of course, difficult, as there are different administrative models across the European Union. For example, the German lands have a legislative power, the Polish voivodeships do not. Yeah. Poland shares 46% of our national shared managed envelope. We see the investment competence directly to the regions. 46% of all the cohesion policy money in this term that Poland has is in direct management of the regions. We have good macroeconomic effects. It's a system that works. We don't want to change it. But we are open to introducing reforms and investments if the European Commission comes up with a way that helps to incorporate it without predefining the centralization of managing the EU funds on the national.
On the competitiveness fund, a very quick follow-up. So you think that involvement of the SMEs is the way to achieve more geographic distribution, as opposed to having strict rules on how the fund should be distributed across the union?
I think it's the only way, and it's the only way also to get social and political support of the proposal. Let me remind you, Draghi's report, a fundamental report on where the European investment policy should go. In my country, in Poland, and many countries in the region, what the public opinion heard about the report, and the only thing that actually broke through the news, was the fact that when you look at the consultees of that report, we see companies and stakeholders that are focused only in a few member states, most developed member states, that are not from this part of Europe.
Yeah.
This is what I'm talking about, that we need to create a sense and a feeling of ownership of the biggest European projects across all member states. This is the only way to grow our union stronger. And yes, in that respect, investing in SMEs is the crucial factor to make competitiveness work.
Jan Strasky, do you agree with this? Because what the Northern European countries, or what Germany would say, if I can interpret their feeling on this, is that the ECF is a market-driven instrument and it should reward excellence. So, you know, attaching too many strings to it would actually create more harm than good. Do you agree with this, or how do you feel about this question?
So, I actually share Jan's sentiment very much. I mean, we have to design the new budget and the ECF in a way that takes everybody along. I mean, otherwise it's not going to work. And you know the reaction to the Draghi report from the new EU countries was a bit held back because they felt, some of them, that it was not really addressing their problems. But I think there is a room for very meritocratic tools in the budget. We have the Horizon program that rewards academic excellence, and it helps to diffuse innovation to the new countries, this work. We have other tools that can be used, the important projects of common European interest that try to do something similar, so bring kind of more developed countries together with less developed countries. It's something that we have in the Commission's proposal, and it's a good thing. Then there will have to be other ways, because the sentiment that has been expressed, I share. It has to be a budget that works for the whole Union, for all the countries.
Yeah, and now I'd like to go to the last part of the proposal, which are the own resources, which for the non-budget experts in the room are essentially new proposed EU-wide taxes that will be used to finance the budget and to pay back the post-COVID debt that was issued. And the Commission proposed new levies on tobacco and e-cigarettes, electronic waste that's not recycled, corporate revenues, among other things. And Zsolt, I know that you've been not too positive on the Commission's proposals for the own resources when they were put forward in July. Why do you think they should have had a different approach, and what's not to like with the new taxes that have been proposed?
Let me start by clarifying that most of the EU budget revenues, wherever they come from, they are a burden on national budgets. For example, in 2021, in the current multi-annual financial framework, a non-recycled plastic waste levy has already been introduced. This is in place. But this is paid by national finance ministries to the EU budget. So we introduced it. It is called an own resource. It is counted, as a revenue. But the same revenue comes from, national member states. Now, whether the revenue comes from this plastic waste levy or the baseline distribution by gross national income, it only changes the cross-country distribution of the burden, but the burden remains the same on the national budgets. Having said that, even this plastic waste levy has a positive side effect because it incentivizes EU member states to increase the recycling rate of plastic, which is good for the environment. So it is in line with an EU policy goal. But on the financing side, I think we shouldn't mislead ourselves that these new own resources will somehow create a magic new revenue which was coming from the moon. No, most of these revenues coming from national budgets, and there's a burden on national budget. Again, they can still have positive impacts. For example, this electronic waste proposal by the Commission, it might incentivize member states to increase their collection of this electronic waste, which is good. Mobile phones will not, throw away in the forest and poisoning the forest, but it would be collected. So it has a good positive side effect. But after all, the money would be paid by national budgets. So I think we shouldn't fool ourselves that it creates a new money. And there's also one particular proposal which I think is particularly worrisome. The Commission proposed a corporate levy, which should be based on turnover, and moreover, it would be lump sum amounts. So first of all, turnover levies are very distortionary, because, for example, in the banking industry, about 20% of the turnover is profit. In the retail sector, only 2% of the turnover is profit. So if you have a turnover tax, it's a much, much bigger burden on retail and some other sectors than on banking and some other sectors. So it has a major adverse impact across different sectors. Also, a turnover tax taxes each stages of the production. So one input which goes to another intermediate product, then that also tax which goes to another intermediate product, that's also tax which goes to the final product. So each stage of the production is taxed. So it could be a kind of cascading of the tax burden, which is very disadvantageous. And finally, the fact that it's a lump sum amounts, it also means that it would be a smaller burden on big companies than on mid-sized companies. So I think this turnover tax should be clearly abolished. Now, other proposals might stay, but again, we shouldn't fool ourselves that it creates new money. No, it doesn't create new money. It would just reallocate the burden across EU countries.
Do you share his concerns on the corporate tax? And more broadly, do you think that there was a potential to propose taxes that created new revenues that weren't already being collected by national administrations, and these ideas haven't been included in the own resources proposal?
Okay, so I agree completely on what Zsolt said about the corporate levy. On the own resources, more generally, I think it's a bit of a misnomer, because own resources are either taken from existing revenues of the national states, or they are potential revenue of the national states. So there is really no own resource as such to my mind, and in a way. Okay, on the issue of the plastic levy, plastic waste levy, and the e-waste levy, these are good things. But two observations. One is that as they take out as they internalize the externality, so as people reduce the bad behavior, they also reduce the revenue of the budget, right? So in a way, if this revenue works as it should, it brings the revenue to zero. And the second observation is that the countries may not be very happy to deviate very far from the distribution of contributions that they see in the GNI contribution. So what Zsolt was saying, that it changes the distribution. But the countries may still observe what the distribution is and try to bring it back to what they observe and what they're happy with. So my suggestion would be more to go for like obvious things, the customs duties, really give the countries that collect them only a small percentage for the collection costs and the rest passing to the budget. But otherwise, I think it's, in a way, a red herring to spend too much time on the discussion of own resources, and we should focus more on reprioritizing the spending of the budget.
Jan, Sisko, it seems that there is, not only on this panel, a lot of pessimism against the own resources, and there have been a lot have been put on the table, but there doesn't seem to be one that has, unanimous or even close to unanimous support among member states. So do you see any of the own resources being actually approved at the end of the negotiations? And what happens if that's not the case? Should countries simply pay more in terms of GNI contributions? Should the debt be rolled over? What do you think should happen then?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm sharing a lot of pessimism that has been expressed in the last couple of minutes on this panel. The European Commission is facing a close to impossible task to find a common solution of all the member states. Some solutions that seem attractive or at least possible for my member state might not seem so for others. So I would especially like to stress out the point that if we can find new own resources anywhere, they have to be found in the potential sources of funding. So places that are not, or solutions that are not in place yet. And here there has been a talk over the last months, I would say, about a European ESTA solution. So a tax or de facto payment for every non-European citizen who is entering Europe on holidays or whatnot. A similar payment that every European needs to pay when they travel to the United States. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is around $30 now in the States, a one-off. It's not a payment that exists in any member states right now in the European Union, so that could be a potential avenue of conversation, trying to find a solution over there that we would be very much open to pursue. We're also open to any discussions regarding managing loans and extending the loans that we all take as the European Commission. However, I'm not delusional. I also know what the Constitutional Tribunal in Germany has said. I also know what the position of the frugal Swiss over here. But regardless, seeing the challenges, economic challenges, and also security challenges that we are facing as Europe, perhaps it is also time to acknowledge that by doing more of the same, we're not going to change very much in terms of European competitiveness. So perhaps we do indeed need to need to do a bit more and spend a bit more.
Yeah, and that's a good note to end our panel. I'm sure we'll be talking about these topics more and more over the long negotiations that will end in 2027. So there's a lot of time left, but I'd like to thank my speakers, and please remain seated, and I will invite on stage Joanna Roberts, who will be sitting down with Marcel Le Chanteur from our partner Lilly. Over to you.